Hi guys, and thanks for joining me on another episode of Design and a Half. Today we're going to talk a little bit about constraints, and when I'm saying constraints, I'm not necessarily only referring to design constraints, but I'm just going to refer to constraints as a whole, because constraints don't necessarily apply to design. They apply on a global scale to absolutely all projects. So you have all of the projects that you are working with in general will have constraints. Either we're talking about business constraints, either we're talking about technological constraints, or whatever other type of constraint that there may be. Basically, constraints sort of give you a box around what you are building, so that whatever it is that you are building fits into several requirements that are coming in from different sources. And the whole trick of design and basically all jobs that are working within constraints are to find that sweet spot between meeting the constraints as well as sort of giving your own opinion, adding your own value to the problem solution proposition, and generally trying to find a balance between somehow managing to capture all of those constraints and tying them into the final solution. And this is oftentimes easier said than done, just because there are so many factors that come into play whenever you're talking about a new project. For example, if we're talking about design, there's things like budget, there's things like timelines, there's things like technology constraints. For example, some technologies might not give you the possibility of expressing yourself in a specific design way, as opposed to other technologies that could probably give you that freedom of expressing yourself differently and basically giving you a broader range of motion and of design expression, if you will. And this was usually the case with the web. Like, the web is probably the clearest example of how sort of technological constraints shaped our landscape. Because back when it started, like in 2004, I remember the whole 2.0 craze era, where everyone was sort of going to find a new way of displaying information, and it was basically a non-stop race against other designers who are trying to come up with all sorts of funky new ideas with buttons and how they looked. But actually, all of those things were in actuality tied to some advancements with CSS, with HTML, and the fact that they were able to give you a broader range of expression in terms of design, which meant obviously that designers basically took advantage of this to its fullest extent, and sort of that's how this Web 2.0 concept became popular. And I do remember that was back when I sort of started as a designer. I don't think it was 2004, excuse me, I think it was 2008, sorry, there was a mismatch. And around that time period, around 2008, 2010, that's when the 2.0 boom hit. That's when Smash magazine just became this huge hit with a lot of designers. That was when a lot of sort of design information just became available to the general public. And it was back in that time when a lot of us, of my generation's designers, sort of established themselves and then started learning. There's actually quite a bunch of them out there who were self-learners and who used Smash magazine and a lot of sort of information that was at hand at that time period to learn how to code HTML, how to do WordPress themes, and so on and so forth. And sort of at that particular time, WordPress themes were pretty scant if you compare them with whatever it is that we have right now. Like in at that time period, we had WordPress themes which were pretty basic, if you will. They didn't have that much information in them, and the display of information was rather scarce, if you will. It sort of limited the way designers express themselves, and yet at that particular time period, Flash was super in vogue, and a lot of websites like Too Advanced, if shout out to those guys who can still remember Too Advanced and loved to go to Too Advanced to sort of get some inspiration as to what's sort of trending in web design and Flash and all of that stuff. It was ages ago. You would not believe the stuff people did back then. It was sort of an age when portfolios were more or less embellished. They were quite illustrated, if you want to. Like, a lot of people didn't use this sort of style of illustration, the style of portfolio that we have right now, which is largely focused on images and sort of boxes and displaying stuff in a viewport with a white background. Back then, people were like super into interfaces that were really intricate. They were really into interfaces that were super painterly and had all these small subtleties that really gave out the impression of something well crafted and something someone used a lot of energy and invested a lot of energy into. And that was sort of awesome because I feel like it was sort of the beginning of web design, and it was sort of a magical period for a lot of people because they were trying out new stuff, and basically new stuff was invented daily. And I think that right now we're in a time period that, if you think about it, isn't so much focused on advancing the craft of a designer, and it's more about solving a problem and sort of addressing the people that are consuming. But the thing is that consumers, oddly enough, have become less and less, just because basically what happens is when you have a lot of people, you also have a lot of noise that's being produced in the background. And the challenges with today's designers is to basically sort of find new ways of addressing those people directly without all of the background noise, and sort of trying to push or keep the whole background noise apart, so you can focus just on the content that's really important for you. And additionally to what I said earlier, another challenge is to actually manage to capture the attention of a person for more than 5 minutes. And this is actually a huge challenge even for me when I'm talking about these sort of podcast episodes, because for the most part, a lot of people just have a really limited time span. Obviously, the way I present content is not necessarily the most engaging one, and I'm pretty sure it's sort of my fault, and I'm working to make everything more engaging and make it more interactive, and think about what subjects are probably more useful to you guys. By the way, if you have suggestions with regards to what you would like for me to talk about, please leave comments and let me know if I should basically mention a specific subject that you want touched, or do you want my opinion about it. Like, I would really love this to be a conversation rather than a monologue, but you would really have to help me on this and tell me what you would like to hear, rather than me sort of trying to figure out what it is that you guys would like to hear. Sorry about the stuttering. But coming back to what I said earlier, the challenges are to actually being able to address to a person and sort of push aside all of the noise that's being generated by everyone else, to be able to capture that person's attention for a limited amount of time. And I think going forward, this is sort of the whole Bitcoin that's going to basically revolutionize whatever it is that's going to happen next. Because our lives are super busy if you think about it. Like, we have very limited time to do a lot of stuff. We have limited time with our family, we have limited time with ourselves, we have limited time for ourselves, which means that we basically invest more time into working than we do relaxing, and all of the time that we actually do relax, it's basically time that's spent sleeping, not sort of relaxing in a productive way, even though the concept of being productive while relaxing is sort of stupid, because that shouldn't even friggin' exist, but whatever. I'll basically touch that separately in another episode. Anyways, getting back on point. So the problem I see going forward, and my prediction is that going forward, attention is going to be as important for people as sort of Bitcoin, if you will, and the attention of a person, to be able to capture it for more than I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes, if you will, is basically what's going to make some businesses succeed or fail. And I think this is actually why the fact that we are so sort of captured and enslaved into this digital world, it's full of rabbit holes, and there's a lot of places that basically your mind can go down and wander, and you won't even notice whenever like 10 or 20 minutes have passed just by you watching some video on YouTube and so on, which is why I think a lot of people sort of gave up on following their dreams, gave up on doing something specific in their free time, just because they got captured in this whole mire of consuming content. And in a way, what I'm trying to do is be different than the trends that I've seen online, just because I don't want to encourage people to consume my content mindlessly, but sort of intentionally, and decide what chunks they are sort of interested in, rather than just talking about bullshit for hours on end. And I think that would not provide them with so much value as just like trying to focus in on a specific subject and making a decision on what they should be viewing. Besides, all of these videos and are organized in a way that's sort of logical, and I think that also helps you sort of find them easier, and at the same time sort of theme around what you would like to hear, and basically create a playlist. But getting back on track, constraints, I think, and especially technological constraints are super important, especially when we're talking about design. And then I think a lot of designers sort of miss this point, and especially nowadays, because I've seen a lot of designers and product people sort of get oriented towards design that looks really pretty, that looks really dribbly, and is really tasty, and has a lot of juicy fucking shadows and all of that stuff. Like, it's nice to have that stuff, but at the same time, I think people are way too absorbed of sort of making something that looks beautiful and sort of shows everyone, oh my god, look at what skill I have, look at all the stuff that I can give you and show you, and so on. And to some extent, I do understand that stuff. I do understand their optic and their mindset, but I think it's sort of quite limited in scope, and at the same time it doesn't show maturity in terms of a profession, because professionals usually don't think so much about, or basically don't care as much about how other people judge them based on what they do, as much as they care about fixing what they intended to do in the first place, and sort of what they set out to do in the first place. Which means that I, as a designer, care more about solving the problem right now than I care about how that problem got solved. Just because I'm not as focused on the delivery method of said design, rather than on the end result. Because it's sort of my personal belief that design should be functional, should be focused on the problem, and it should be focused on giving you a solution rather than just sort of giving you a solution in a different way. And basically the delivery should be the main differentiating factor between other products. And I think this is, if you think about it, this is sort of a larger discussion to be had, whether or not products that have visual differentiators without functional differentiators are better or worse, and what is the value that they bring for a specific user. Because my personal opinion is that if two products look the same, not look the same, sort of, if two products look differently but they have the same functionality, as long as the user experience is similar to each one of them, I think none of them or one of the competing products cannot make a stronger argument against the other one, and so forth, just because the differentiating factor is not sort of big enough to make a good case for itself by itself, to be able to convince the person that is looking at the product, dude, I want to buy this stuff. I don't think it's possible, and I think it's not good enough. This stuff has functioned up to a point, back when applications were still in an infancy stage, back when the whole application marketplace was in an infancy stage, and when development was still in its initial phases. But right now, when we're talking about people who have already set some expectations from the applications they consume and use, I think you can no longer have and justify just doing a great UI without innovating from other points of view as well, like functionality, something which makes your application stand out from that perspective, not the visual side only. The visual side is okay, but it rather caters to the marketing side rather than to the user experience side. Obviously, if the color choice is absolutely atrocious and the UI looks crap, it's going to influence user experience by a large quantity, and that's not okay, as I said, obviously. But on the other hand, if you have two applications which look really nice and have similar functionality, how will I be able to determine which one is better for me as a user? Because I'll have to look at them from an objective point of view. Pricing, features, and basically aesthetics, of course, but aesthetics is subjective. I'm only talking about the objective factors which come into play whenever you're making a decision, not the subjective ones. The subjective ones aren't as good to be, and from my point of view, shouldn't be part of a discussion whenever you're talking about making a choice between two applications. So if I as a designer would need to buy two applications, I'm not going to look at the one who looks prettiest, but I'm going to look at the one who is cheapest in comparison to what it delivers, and I'm going to look and think about if the features that one offers are up to par with the other one, and see if the prices match or are different, and see what advantages and disadvantages they have. Like, I would rather run a SWOT analysis or some sort of comparison between the two in a spreadsheet and see how they rank up to each other, rather than do it based on the interface alone. And I think this assumption from a lot of designers that users are still naive about how they perceive applications is basically not relevant anymore, and they should basically think about the fact that users have evolved. They have bigger expectations because the competition looks rather differently right now, and it's rather ferocious if you think about how many developers are out there and how many studios are bringing about new applications and new products on a daily basis out there on the marketplace. That's why I think it's really important for us as designers to think about the constraints and basically keep them in our mind at all times if possible. Think about design as a way to use those constraints and be creative with how you come up with a solution, rather than being creative of how you come up with a solution just from a UI perspective, just from a delivery perspective, just from a wrapping perspective of whatever it is that you need to do. Constraints are probably going to be the single most deciding factor of how a designer is being sort of tallied against others, because if you are able to work within constraints, you are doing a good job as a designer. If you're not able to work within constraints, obviously if some of those constraints are reasonable, because at some point you will run into people who have unreasonable expectations of you or your designs, and that needs to be addressed. And basically you need to assert yourself and say this and this product is not going to be able to meet the specific deadline because I have other dependencies while working on several other projects, or because my schedule is already super loaded. That's clear. And this sort of time management discussion is so huge it basically deserves its own episode, just because I feel like a lot of people are struggling to be able to keep a deadline and to manage several projects at the same time. And to some extent I have the same issue, but for me it's rather differently, in the sense that I'm getting tired. The older I get more tired of having to deal with 5 or 6 or 7 deadlines at the same time, just because it's sort of getting more and more difficult to keep track of each of them and keep the tally. And at the same time, there's this cognitive load, there's this cognitive cost associated with switching from context to context. And I think a lot of people are basically losing focus from this whenever they're outputting requirements in terms of timelines. And I think even some of the design managers rarely think about the loads of their people, just because they believe that it's basically a designer's sort of responsibility to make up their timeline and decide how they want to work and how their timeline is going to look. And to some extent they are right, but I think it's not always the case, because you have to accept some sort of responsibility for the load that you're putting on top of the people that you're working with. You can't expect me and other people to be able to always keep a focus on whatever the fuck it is that I'm delivering to you, at the same time have a super good focus on the timeline too, because that means having focus on 2 things at the same time. And let's think about it like this: if you have 7 fucking projects that are working all in parallel, and also have to think about, oh wait, I have more stuff coming next week, like, dude, where's your management being done? Like, am I being the one who's managing the project, or are you the one? Because by the looks of it, it seems like I'm the one managing it, not you. So I should be getting paid as a manager, not you. You may disagree, you may agree. I really don't care. It's just my opinion with regards to this subject, and I think basically management should be accepting their own responsibilities about what their own tasks are, not sort of delegating absolutely everything on top of the seniors and the mids and so on and so forth. Like, that's not how this shit goes down. That's not how this shit should be working. No. We should all accept our own responsibilities for whatever that we have to be doing. And us as a senior, and we seniors in general, have to accept responsibility for the role of execution, but not necessarily for the role of management, because that's not necessarily stipulated into our contracts. Obviously, if you have a contract that stipulates that's different discussion altogether. But in most cases, people don't expect seniors to be able to manage the projects themselves, except in special situations. And I think and one thing that I'm seeing more and more lately is the fact that seniors are sort of becoming these substitutes for management, but are basically paid the same as a normal person, like an execution role, and like basically a mid execution role, not necessarily like a senior execution role, which I think is rather shitty. And I think it's something that needs to change in the future, just because people's sort of expectations with regards to what designers and in general what execution roles have to accept onto themselves has become way too generous and way too big for for its own shoes. We need to basically step down and scale down on the expectation lists and sort of match them with the payments that we are getting in terms of compensation, if you will. Okay, guys, that's about it for today's episode. I really hope you liked it, and if you did, please subscribe and share with a friend, maybe even like it. I know if you liked it. Everything is appreciated, and even if you don't do those things, I still appreciate you taking your time to listen to as much as even 5 minutes out of this episode. It's basically out of your own personal time, and I appreciate you dedicating that to watching this podcast and this episode rather than doing something else. It honors me, and I hope I brought you some insight and help you in some way with regards to this. That being said, I wish you have a great evening and see you in the next episode. Bye bye.